All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are continuing to explore the landscape of learning tech and cutting out the fluff. I am excited for today's conversation. I get excited for a lot of conversations, but I'm really looking forward to this because it's been a while since I've talked about immersive tech. Generative AI has sucked the air out of the room, which in some ways is good. In some ways, I think is unfortunate. But what's interesting is we're actually going to tie the two together. And if you're thinking, wait a minute, I thought this was a conversation about VR. Yes, it's both. And to help me navigate that conversation, I'm joined by Kyle Jackson. He's the co-founder and CEO of Talespin. And so, Kyle, I appreciate you joining me to have this dialogue.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. This is going to be fun.
We're going to have a good time on this one. So if you're wondering what happened to VR and is that still a thing, I hope we answer that question for you and actually change the way you're even thinking about it. So before we get into it, now where are you now? Because we talked about the fact you're moving to Singapore, but your location now is where?
I'm in Los Angeles now, and the team is geographically dispersed at this point. So we're all over the world.
Just kind of everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So background wise, for folks who may not be familiar with your background, because a little bit on how did you end up getting into the immersive space in the first place? That's not a path that everybody takes.
So prior to Talespin, I spent about 15 years in media and entertainment. And so, and the consistent theme was I was basically always at the kind of the bleeding edge where technology and new workflows, new content formats, and new ways of doing things were kind of like being figured out. I literally, that was like the start of my career back in 2000. And so in about 2010, I got introduced to virtual production after the first Avatar, where they brought a lot of those systems back into Hollywood.
Oh, okay.
And all of a sudden we were sitting there looking at, okay, wait, we're going to merge the physical and virtual worlds in real time to make these amazing stories. And so my brain just switched to, okay, that's the way things are going to be done now. And here we are. I got got down the rabbit hole with computer vision technology, with machine learning, with real-time technology, game engines. And somewhere in that 2013, 2014 timeline, I had a bit of a light bulb to go off that was like, wow, this is going to change a lot about the way we work and just how the world works. And why aren't we thinking or rethinking some of our education initiatives and foundations? And so I just started looking as every nook and cranny I could. And there was little conversations going on around that. And then decided to start Talespin in 2015 to see if we couldn't, make a dent in that problem.
So two things that stood out about that I really appreciate is, so one, when you describe it, and I think this is one of the things that sometimes people miss when they think about VR, is you talked about the intermixing of the digital world with the analog world. And I think sometimes when people get in the conversations around VR, their head just jumps to this dystopian realm that's completely distinct and separate from reality. And it's actually not, at least when you're doing it right, it's not that complete disconnect from reality. In fact, like you said, it's very much an intermixing of that. And I think the journey between kind of seeing it in the media and seeing, there's some actual legitimate opportunity when it comes to developing and growing skills in people, I think it's interesting. You saw that back then, and then we're able to bring it to life.
Well, and there's actually some really simple anchoring things that people just kind of ignore, because when you're having when you're in a full VR 6 degrees of freedom VR experience and you're moving around and that your world and your physical world is not aligned to what you're experiencing, you have this disconnection, right? It's
a little trippy at first.
Yeah. And honestly, that's part of that kind of well, wait a second, I don't know that this is good for me. But a lot of the simulations that we've focused on, it's about keeping the connection. It's just about teleporting you somewhere else. So a lot of what we've done, in terms of conversational simulation is you're still seated at your desk. You're just not seated at your desk. You're seated in some imagined world and having a conversation. And so all of a sudden it doesn't feel like you've left your physical body. right? You still are where you are. And that really helps, especially in the early days of like enterprise rollout and stuff. I mean, there's like little things like that actually make a big difference in people's comfort with it.
It's funny you bring that up because I think it's an important call out for folks who may be thinking about or exploring this is sometimes there is this desire, and I'll just say I have to be very careful of it because especially when you're extremely familiar with it, it's
Yeah.
much easier for you to make that jump because you've been around it, you're familiar with it. So you're like, we can just turn the volume up to 11 and it's totally fine versus somebody who's just getting oriented to it. Like you said, there is this almost emotional and psychological discomfort with I'm here, but I'm not. And how disconnected it is very disruptive versus, and that's where I think as I've seen people kind of step into it, the closer to reality you can make it, the more realistic versus going like, hey, I think that's why sometimes the idea of throwing somebody on a roller coaster ride out of the gate, it's just terrible. Cause it's like, well, you wonder why people feel like they're getting motion sick and they're having all these reactions. You put them in a completely dysfunctional environment for their brain to be able to kind of comprehend.
100%. And when you think about how this is likely going to walk out from where we are today, right now, today we have these really, great standalone VR devices, but even things like the Quest Pro and Lenovo's new headset, like, they have a mixed reality mode. And so, everybody talks about kind of someday we're just going to overlay digital content on our physical world. And that's going to be a very comfortable experience. Well, still a few years away, but there's a reason, right? Because that is going to be, it doesn't make that cognitive disconnect between your physical, like the rest of your, anatomy and everything else that you're experiencing and your visual.
Well, and I think what's interesting about that is that even if for folks who that feels different or somewhat disconnected, I mean, in many ways, we're already doing that now.
100%. Yeah.
It's just, I mean, that's what GPS tools or the things that you look up where you're putting objects in your home to see how it would look before you purchase it. All these things, we're doing it far more than I think we recognize, which is why when people say, well, I don't know that we're ever going to get there, I sometimes go, what do you mean? We are there. I just don't know that you're always picking up on it.
Yeah. Well, and I also think we're often in like the worst version of there, like we're like it should be a better version of what we're already doing, including even things like we're doing right now with our cast, right? Like it would be amazing if it felt like you and I were sitting here and having our coffee together doing this morning, and sure. we will be doing that,
we will
before too many years.
Yeah, we're not that far off from it. Okay, so I want to dig deeper into this, but so Talespin, when you talk to people about it, or if somebody were to, let's say, bump into you at Unleash or something like that, how do you describe it to folks? Because yes, it's a VR company, but I know what you're doing and it goes beyond just, we do VR. That's like saying we do internet. It's too broad.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad we're connecting today because we literally have there's so many things that have happened in the last 6 months that finally caught up to a lot of what we've been trying to get people to understand about why we went after this the way we did. And so now I would say we're basically kind of the essential learning platform to counterbalance AI, like simple, right? And the reason I say that is because we focus on human skills. We focus on active learning, which, we're not good at sitting back and like changing our behaviors. Like I'm not going to watch a video and change my behavior and my mindset the way I communicate. No. You have to fail. You have to practice.
Even if we have all the cognitive reasons to do it.
We've proven that. The science is irrefutable at this point. So it was like, okay, we have this gigantic landscape of human skills, soft skills that we now need to universally upskill in. Because that's where our value is going to be, or more of our value. We'll continue to do a lot of other things in the age of AI, but more of our value will be realized in those areas. And, we don't have great tools to do that and great opportunities to do that. So, so that's our focus. We built, as a platform, we built tools to help people make these simulations really easily. We built the learner experience piece so learners can experience it very easily. And we built a bunch of like enterprise integrations to make the enterprise piece of it work very easily. Just trying to like remove all the frictions from solving that problem, basically.
Okay. So what's interesting about your description on this one, and I actually just read, I don't remember. I always am skeptical when I read white papers and stuff anymore, because I'm like, was this generated by the technology?
Yeah.
Type right. It's almost this self-generating thing. But it was talking about what the future of work looks like for people. And the reality, and I very much am in favor of this point of view, that more than ever, our need to be distinctly human is just going to rise as technology can continue to do more of the stuff that's like, well, yeah, you don't really need a person to do this. You literally could have a bot do this stuff. And I think, to your point, what this is highlighting, which can be uncomfortable, is it's highlighting how big of a skills gap we really have, because we thought we had a skills gap. We knew there was a skills gap, but now we're starting to realize like, oh, some of this stuff, yes, we can let machines take care of it, but it's the actually really hard skills that is where those gaps exist. And we don't have a lot of good things in place to build and grow them.
Right. One of the aha moments. So first, it was like the fascination with this idea of real-time technology, real-time content that can change on the fly based on the learner's needs. And this new medium of like, oh, wow, we can actually give people experiences that can be lasting. Like that was the first aha. Yeah. But then the second aha was I was like doing a lot of research and like trying to find like, where is this really going to have the biggest impact? And, back in like 2013 to 2017, I mean, if you looked at the top 10 skills lists, even back then that people were predicting, everybody was already predicting all this stuff. Yes. Right. And so now we're just kind of we're just sitting in that moment. And so there was an amazing book that I read, and I've told a lot of my team about this, which was there's a guy named Brian Christensen who wrote a book called The Most Human Human. And it's a fantastic, it's a great read. And basically there was a Turing test that they used to have for chatbots. It was a competition, and the competition was trying to become the most human chatbot. And they would have human placebos in this competition, right? So Brian, as a writer, became one of the human placebos, and he had to basically convince people that he was a real human and not a chatbot. That was his job. But the book is about how, if you look at the years of this competition, what we did to convince other humans that they were in fact real, like they would encode the worst parts of us into these chatbots. So they'd have chatbots that would swear, and then all of a sudden everybody was like, well, that can't be a chatbot because only humans would do that. So it became this super interesting look in the mirror as to all the things that made us distinctly human. And the book, it's fantastic because, I mean, to me, that's just like, it's like a microcosm of this moment in time where we're now sitting here going like, why are we uniquely capable? What is our special place in this equation with these tools that we are building? And I think we have a lot of the answers. I think some of them are pretty obvious, but yeah, that's what I'm most fascinated about with this whole problem we're trying to solve. Well, how do we index there?
Well, and what's encouraging to me about where, we're going to get into even more how you're doing this, but what's encouraging to me about this is I continue to see this with employees and with people in general. This whole boom of generative AI has forced people to really think about, what is my value? And in some cases, that's a frightening question to ask, because you start seeing things that you go, oh, this actually could do this better, faster, and this component of me. And that can lead to a bit of an identity crisis. And the unfortunate part is that leaves people going, so what do I do about it? And quite frankly, there's a lot of things that people are going, I don't know. I really don't even know. I know I have this gap. I don't even know how to build it. And I think that's one of the things that I think you're doing that is really going to help people cross that bridge to go, yeah, I get it. And maybe you've let some muscles atrophy that you shouldn't have. And that's okay, because we're going to build them back up. We're going to actually give you the opportunities and the experiences to strengthen those muscles and actually make them stronger than they were before, to future-proof you from some of this emerging tech.
Well, and the amazing part, once we actually do that, I mean, the way I look at it is a lot of what we spend our time doing day in and day out isn't what our bodies and our minds were built for, right?
No.
So we have this like it's square peg round hole right now in a lot of work,
Yeah.
right? And we had we're working with a number of partners around kind of like how generative AI comes into play with creating content at scale, right? Because that's now a superpower with this. And so we had a workshop like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was really senior learning leaders, and we hammered through the process that we had been refining to how to like accelerate creating learning content.
Okay.
And then we sat down at the end of like the 3 days, and we said, how does everybody feel about what just happened? And around the room, everybody said some version of, this is the first time I felt like I've been in flow state for days. So it reversed, like because
Yeah.
and we literally drew a like a graphic on the board, which was like, we have all this amazing power here, and we spent all the time trying to funnel it down into this little keyboard, or and
Yeah.
what this generative AI stuff does is it almost reverses the flow, right? Like
Yep.
you have this thing that's like, you can just be this like unconstrained thinker.
Yeah.
And it's super powerful. And then once you start doing that, like, I mean, it's so energizing, honestly, it's so fun. That we took a bunch of skeptics, that were like, I don't think we're going to be able to make, good learning content using this technology, to like, that's the only way we should make it. It just got so much better.
Right.
So,
well, and again, I think the point that you're hitting on with that is that it's not and this is the part that I think people get nervous about, is they hear it making the content for us, and they picture that as this disconnected, like, so we aren't connected with it. And it's like, no. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is distinctly, your role is completely different. And it's the part of it that actually brings you to life.
Yeah.
Instead of makes you go, I really hate this. I really hate this, aspect of it. Like you said, we're channeling all this stuff into our keyboards, and it's like, well, that's not really what gets people out of bed in the morning.
Yeah. So it's why we all dream about, having a cabin and building something in our garage, right? Like, it's like we're forcing all of our energy this way instead of the way we're wired. And so I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think about the launch video from like Microsoft Copilot, and again, where that's going to go, we'll see how it comes to life. But I just saw, it creating the PowerPoint decks, and thinking to myself, no one that I've ever encountered in the history of my career has said, you know what I love doing?
Yeah.
Structuring and organizing and laying out slides. I just get up in the morning and I go, I love doing this on a day-to-day basis. And yet we've become so accustomed to that. I do think there is this fear of like, well, but if it's doing that for me, then what do I do? And it's like all the stuff that you really like doing, like figuring out what is the most important stuff to say, who's our audience, like thinking critically about this stuff.
Yep. All the systems thinking, all the critical thinking, all the communication, collaboration, like those are the skills that have been on those lists since 2014, and now here we are, right? And it's super clear that is this. Those are the new kind of superpowers in all of this. If you know how to index better there, or you know how to upskill better there, then you're going to be in a great spot. Like, and honestly, you're going to be able to do more in a single lifetime than we've ever been able to do, which is also something that's almost hard for us to fathom, right? Because I mean, I get up and do like a mini hackathon with myself over tea, and I build stuff that I have no skills to do some of the things that I'm doing. And, it's
a little
amazing.
mind bending. It is. It's frightening in some ways and amazing in others. And that's where I think these next few years, it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. So on this topic, though, I actually want to connect it back to the simulation space, because before we were going live, we were talking about the fact that these things are not disconnected and separate from themselves. So the idea of immersive simulation design and generative AI, these are not competing technologies. In fact, I think you've done a brilliant job of talking about the fact, like, no, these actually pair together to create a better experience. So talk a little bit about that, because I don't know that people always connect the dots between those two.
Yeah, I think the simplest place to start is even if the value of simulation and immersion has been really high, it's still been historically pretty expensive to do. And so
Very expensive.
even if enterprises who are convinced, they're like, well, how do I do this for an entire onboarding program or for a large, for 100 different learning initiatives that I have? And the answer hasn't been really that scalable, or there's not a way to do it. And so so there's tools like we and others have built kind of no code tools to try to make that make that more cost effective. But the piece that is always been kind of the unlock is this generative AI, several components of generative AI. So
Okay.
what we see with GPT-4 and large language models, that can be used, as a huge help to help create the context of the simulation, the content, the spoken content of the simulation, the personas, all of the things that do add up to a substantial cost. We also now have generative voices, right? So like in terms of actually generating the
which have come
content.
a long ways, by the way.
Oh.
I was on a panel the other day about this, and they're almost, well,
They're
in
close.
many ways, they can be indistinct. Well, they can actually be indistinguishable in
Yes.
that you can use real people to create AI models of that voice and expand it. And it's like, well, it is a human voice. It's just you're using AI to expand its capability.
100%. Yeah. And so that's another scaling factor of, okay, now that expensive cost goes away, and then, or becomes more scalable, because it's still a cost, but it goes more scalable.
There's still a cost, but it's scalable because you're no longer doing this on a 1-for-1.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the same is happening in generative 3D, right? So we're getting to the place where, just like you see with like Midjourney or some of these image creators, you're getting to a place where I can type in a text prompt and generate a 3D environment. And so you put those three things together, and now you really have a very scalable content pipeline. You have your cost to create what is, kind of the best modality out there becomes on par or better than almost anything else you could do. No different than video, let's say, right? And now all of a sudden, it completely changes the calculus for where you should use this, because our goal has always been, you shouldn't be trading off effectiveness for cost. And, so we have to get the cost thing out of the equation.
Drilled in. Yeah.
Right. And then once we've done that, then it's just about effectiveness. And how can we give people like the most focused and effective learning and engaging learning that we've ever seen. Right.
Okay.
And now I think with these different tools in place, you can do that at a really large scale.
Okay.
And so,
well, I was just going to say with this, I think, kind of unpacking it is really helpful, because this stuff I think people have historically seen, hey, there's some connection, there's some opportunity with this stuff. I don't think anybody has ever disagreed that, isn't it great when people have a chance to apply and practice something? Nobody's ever like, no. That's that's a terrible use of people's time. But I think then the complexity has come into, so how do you do that?
Yeah.
Because that becomes challenging. It becomes non-scalable. It becomes expensive. It becomes time-consuming, all of these things. And from the sounds of it, one of the things that you're really tapping into, the generative AI piece, is, and again, was VR a great way to do that in general, even without generative AI? I would say, compared to flying everybody in, trying to run simulations, building real, analog environments for people you just go, well, okay, that's only going to be accessible to a fraction of the population. You start stepping into VR, you start getting into accessibility, but even that was like, okay, well, we got to scale models, and we still have to have people in the loop. And I think generative AI is now not necessarily, and this goes back to, is it eliminating people's capability? No, it's just, you still were only tapping into a fraction of the percentage of people that you could actually reach. And now it sounds like with this, now it's becoming accessible to the masses instead of the few. Yeah.
Well, and we see, we see customers now, for the first time, honestly, in 7 years, right? We've been at this for 7 years. This was, which is kind of hard to fathom sometimes.
Yeah.
But 7 years in, and this is the first time we're having conversations where companies are like, let's go enterprise wide. Let's look at 100 initiatives. Let's look at, it's like, okay, now it's just like anything else in their toolbox. And
Okay.
they also have this, this kind of like, like you said, no one denies the practice and apply, and they'd like to do that more
No.
places. So they're like, okay, well, we have an element of that everywhere. How do we get that accessible to people, at scale? And so I think this is the year where all the things that needed to come together actually came together, to be able to just put it in the toolbox. And then it goes back to like the foundation, like the principles, like the foundational elements of what do you need to do to get engaged people, the fastest path to success, right?
Yeah.
And if that's a coding experiment, then that's one thing. If it's a video, it's another thing. But I think this modality, and especially with a lot of the other things that are moving in terms of where skills are moving, it's going to play a big part in that equation.
Yeah. So with this one, I'm curious, because to me, this has always been what got me really excited about the possibilities of really XR technology across the board, whether we're talking AR or VR. But I think when I think of VR, I really think about the simulation piece of being able to practice in a safe environment, do something and actually see how it goes, and then reflect, get feedback, and do it over and over and over, which again, just in general, what I just described is extremely hard to scale in any other way.
Yeah.
Because even you have to do it more than once.
Yeah.
So even if you can get people together and go, hey, let's do it once, it's like, well, that's great. But if you can't repeat that over time, you're not building the skills piece. We talked about the fact that this is not always an easy jump for people to make, even though universally people nod their heads and say, yes, we agree, practice and application is a good thing. What are you seeing? What have you seen organizations stumble with on this, though? Because saying, yes, we agree, and this is a good idea, and doing it well, there sometimes is a crevasse between those two that is, not everybody makes the jump.
Yeah. I think, this is another area of kind of upskilling that needs to happen. So if you think there was a reason that those learning organizations would then hire Second City to come in and run improv, role play theaters, because creating the context and the conversational relevance around that is a skill, and
it's very much a skill,
right? And so inside of enterprise learning and development teams and instructional design teams, that's not a skill that has usually been homegrown. At least that's not what we've seen so far, right?
In many cases, it hasn't been rewarded either. That's the other.
Right. And so this concept of like world building and being able to create kind of the mental model for a simulation, so you can actually design one, is it's we're having to pull people along there. I think there's people who naturally index that way. And then there's others that are much more talented in kind of the analytical side of looking at a sea of data, or looking at a sea of learner outcomes, and distilling that down into impact. And I don't necessarily, so far we don't necessarily always see those as the same person. Most often not.
No.
Right. And so that's an area where the generative AI stuff actually can help a lot, honestly, because you can start to use kind of like a little bit of codified process to go, okay, well, I'll give the instructional, or we'll give the instructional designers the parameters, the mental model. And then it's just about asking the questions and playing with it. And then you actually get to a good outcome. So it's really interesting, because these are all kind of like interconnected problems, right?
Well, no, and it's for folks who haven't played around with the generative AI tools. I hear a lot of stuff on like, oh, it can write this and it can do this, and I'm like, yeah, it can, but I feel like you're missing the bigger capabilities of this. I mean, I play with it a lot, and in terms of your ability, like you said, to manipulate and transform something that normally you would spend a lot of time thinking like, okay, how would this actually all come together? Just again, tactically speaking, what kind of changes would I need to make to this environment? Or, how would I change the dynamics of this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
You very quickly can give it some cues and inputs to say, and I'm just thinking going back to these simulations. I mean, if we were to sketch one of these things out, if you were to say how to have a difficult conversation with your employee,
Mm-hmm.
about a performance issue, being able to change on the fly. Now let's imagine that employee is this, they're dealing with this, and this is the performance difference.
Yeah.
Instead of having to take loads of people and money to try and revamp an environment to do it, you literally could do it very quickly, but you're still playing a critical role in that.
100%. Yeah. And that's where I think the learning design practice itself changes quite a bit with these tools, not just for simulations, because I look at like what Khan Academy did. I don't know if you saw that with the GPT-4 announcement, but they built this really interesting kind of like chatbot integration, which was basically like a virtual tutor while you were sitting in the lessons. But
Okay.
the way that they configured the tutor was it was super helpful. Like, and you couldn't cheat. It was almost like giving the kid the permission to try to cheat and then turning that into a learning opportunity. It was awesome. Right? Because of course they're going to ask the question of like, well, just give me the answer. Well, no, hey, let me, and it would redirect and it would explain some of the systems and stuff. And I looked at that and I was like, this is incredible learning. Like, and so it's like, that type of overall design thinking, that now we have to do, or we have the opportunity to do. We don't have to, right? But we have an opportunity to do. I see a bunch of these implementations and I'm like, wow, that now we're talking. This is fun stuff. This is the way I wish I would have learned.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Some of the things that I sketch out as possibilities or explore, in terms of what you can do, I look at it and go, I wish I had the opportunity to learn like this when I was doing, like, this would have created such a richer experience. And I probably would have gone so much further had I had this along the way. So with this one, as you think about folks who are, kind of stepping into this, because again, while the conversation, I mean, a year ago, even, I feel like VR for learning and development, VR in corporate, it was a huge conversation piece. And then it evaporated a little bit. But in the conversations I have with my peers, it hasn't gone anywhere. If anything, it's grown because now the possibilities of what you can do just expanded, which we've been talking about with the capability of generative AI. But for folks who haven't been necessarily down this path, where do you see folks starting with things? Are there key areas that they're looking at in their skill taxonomies that they go, we really are lacking in this? You talked about people investing in kind of bigger enterprise approaches to things. How is that shifting?
I think we have a pretty biased view because we're focused on one kind of specific area of skills. So when people reach out to us, it's usually for a specific area. But so I don't get to see as much of the inbounds for kind of the vocational training and some of the other things that are going on that are equally amazing. But that just doesn't come to our doorstep. But when people reach out to us, we often see pretty common use cases. It's de-escalation regardless of what the context is. So doctor patient, or in hospitality, or in retail, or even just in leadership. Like, it's that it's being able to take a difficult moment and turn it into a trust building moment, right?
Okay.
And so when somebody's completely new and just kind of wandering in, like, we've invested now with several partners, Pearson and Singularity Group, and a few others that are helping to build just kind of off the shelf content. So we're entering that space now. Like, in any other modality, you would just pick something up that's pre-made and start with that. So that's what we see happening, I would say, more frequently. But that also means people very quickly move to that second stage, which is like, okay, I got conviction. This was cool. It really worked. How do we now?
We need to amp this up.
I'm
going to pause you there for a second. Well, what I'm going to pause you there on that I think is actually exciting about this that you just described is, historically in the L&D industry, one of the biggest, I don't know, areas of conversation that I think a lot of enterprises have is this conversation around off-the-shelf content.
Yeah.
That they struggle with. And as a learning leader, I will say, I wrestle with this myself all the time, where you go, having nothing is frustrating, because when people have a gap, it's hard to go, well, we don't really have anything to help you with that. Even with the plethora of stuff you can find yourself, people aren't always good at finding stuff, and they don't always know where to go. And so it's challenging when you're like, well, we don't really have anything. Yet on the same side of that debate, you end up in situations where you go, I've been in situations where I have it, and then you're frustrated with having it because you're like, okay, this isn't going to solve your problem by itself, type of thing. I can't just send you a XYZ course and your problem's fixed. And so you end up in this paradigm of going, I don't know if I love it or I hate it.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is actually what I can see being in some ways the next generation of this, of saying, what if that off-the-shelf experience was an experience, not just a piece of content, which not only allowed you to get that baseline knowledge, but gives you an actual opportunity to put those skills into place, which that would be a far cry better than, well, I gave you some generic information on a topic that is relative to something you're doing, versus, you know what, everybody has had to have a difficult conversation with someone. Everyone has had to de-escalate with somebody who is really upset, type of a thing, and giving you a chance to actually do something with it versus just telling you what you should do hypothetically is wildly different.
Yeah, 100%. And same goes for, for sales, for leadership. I mean, there's just a million, use cases where that's true. And the way that I communicate this mostly to investors, honestly, and I think it'd be valuable to get the learning community, speaking the same way, is, we basically have had this plethora of passive learning that we can push to people.
Yes.
Right. And we've never had a scalable active learning approach, which is why the concept of off the shelf doesn't ever pair with active learning, because the methods we've had to do that have been, role playing or seminars or, in-person events, things like that. And now we actually can merge those two concepts, and we can have the scalability of library, the scalability and ease of library, but we can have the engagement and the actual predictable change in outcomes of active learning.
Yeah.
Right. So we're in the bottom part of the pyramid. We're not in the top part of the pyramid anymore. So, if I send you a thing on de-escalation, and even if you watch it, which is already a win,
which is already a big step in and of itself.
Right. Yeah. If you watch it, I've already won. But the best case scenario is you're going to retain like 20% of that, right? 20-30% of that. So, I didn't really help myself.
Which you may or may not even apply well. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Even that 20% that you may retain,
yeah,
when it hits the fan and you have to do something about it, whether you're actually going to take that and transfer your knowledge into action in a way that is productive and actually leads to a positive outcome, is a complete crapshoot. And then if it doesn't
100%.
go well, chances are you're going to dump the whole thing, because you're going to go, well, that didn't work. Never mind.
Yeah. You're going to blame it on your lack of ability to implement, but you didn't even realize, you didn't even make that connection probably. Okay. But yeah,
I like what you said about scalable active learning. I really like the way you're framing that up, because I think that's something that any learning leader can think about and get excited about, is the fact that that is something that we want. You look at the engagement that we have with a lot of passive learning. It's a challenge, because while people have the best intentions, just like they have the best intentions of eating right and working out, when it comes to actually doing it, and when you think about the fact that, like, well, yeah, but if I engage in this passive learning, it's not necessarily improving my outcomes or helping me.
Yeah.
It's hard to get people to actually participate.
Yeah. Yeah. And we generally are seeing, 5x plus the engagement from a program that's rolled out in VR. Okay. And that's probably mostly due to the novelty, honestly. But I think let's let that novelty wear off. And you still go, well, wait, if I go and do it and I actually know that the next outcome is going to be predictable, better for me, then I think that will stick. I think the reason that you get the 10% engagement of a learning initiative that rolls out for passive learning is because everybody's going like, it's not going to stick anyways.
Yeah, I've done this before. I've already dismissed it.
Yeah.
So,
I
go for it.
I was
just going to say on the go. You finish.
I think there's a huge amount of investment in those passive learning programs, and I can only imagine the actual impact we could make if we shift that thinking, right?
Yes. I 100% agree with that even if we made the subtle shift, which it didn't used to be subtle. That's the thing. And that's where I think the point of this conversation for people listening is, I understand why people think shifting from passive to active learning is this massive, impossible task. And it's quickly becoming not a massive, impossible task anymore. And so to your point, if we could even flip the switch from, yes, we have a bunch of passive learning to, yes, we still have a bunch of kind of generic whatever learning, but it's active learning, I think the performance move in and of itself would notably justify any sort of investment in it.
Agreed.
Okay. So, well, not to mention the fact that going back to the measurement piece, whenever I talk to people about measuring things, you can measure, I don't know, we won't get into this because this will derail me and we'll end up ranting about this for too long. But when you think about active learning, being able to actually measure performance differences or behavior change becomes so much easier than when you're measuring passive learning. Because going back to our model that we talked through, you really have no way of gauging. I have no idea whether you're going to do anything with this. And even if you do, I don't know whether you're going to do it better than you would have before if you had no exposure to this. Versus active learning, you can very quickly see, well, I don't know, what did they do? How did they react? Oh, they did it again. Now we can see, did that improve?
Yeah, we this is another one of these topics where, like, I feel, we were talking about this before we jumped on, like, we've been telling different versions of the Talespin story, or different chapters of it, over 7 years, because there was all these different components that we were trying to bring together. And at any one point in time, people would kind of get one of them. And one of those was the ability to focus on skill measurement, like get out of the, just make it simple, but make it attachable, right, to the learner's actions. And so we were internally talking about the company for about 2 years, just around the concept of skills mobility. Like, we were saying, listen, at the end of the day, our content gives the learner and the organization a lot of check-ins to whether or not somebody is demonstrating that skill. And if you just roll that data up, right, both for the learner and for the organization, now you actually have GPS. You actually have real GPS, right?
Yes. Because
right now, like, the idea of attaching skills to passive learning content is not GPS. It's like the illusion of GPS, right? It's clever recommendation algorithms for the sake of organizing content. And
there are best assumptions. There are best assumptions is about as good as we can get.
Yeah. But this takes it out of best assumptions to actually observed behaviors, right? Yes. And so that's been very wedded into what we've been trying to do. Now there's there's a new horizon that we're working on now, which is how do you do that in open-ended simulations?
Okay.
Right. Which is super fun. And I think we have a couple different solves for it, but it's so
you're pulling the fences out, saying you have a little more free reign.
Yeah. I mean, carefully. Obviously, the part of this is making sure that you can control. There's going to be a news story someday where some company's AI chatbot harasses an employee and the employee goes after the business. Like, that's going to happen because people are going to happen irresponsibly, right? Yep. And so we're making sure that as we go through the process of bringing some of these technologies together to help solve these bigger scale problems, we're doing it in a way where we are very prescriptive about those fences and where they are and where they aren't.
Okay.
And you can't do that.
Maybe expanding the fences is a better way to put it than pulling them out. expanding the
Well,
fences to create more.
I'm seeing people just pull them out, and I'm like, ooh, that's not going to end well.
I know. And I think that's some of the fear, not fear, but some of the concern I have. I did a video on YouTube last week about it, about where some of this stuff's going. We just need to be careful that we don't just go, hey, look at all the possibilities and not think carefully about, yeah, but there's risks, and that doesn't mean you don't pursue it, but you need to take those things into consideration so you don't accidentally pull a leash that, actually is keeping you alive.
Yeah. And
Okay.
and I think the underlying skill piece, is something that can track along that. Just going back to what you were saying, because I think, and there's some pretty novel breakthroughs that I think need to happen to actually have the fences pulled and be good at skill measurement in that
Yep.
broad kind of open field. But we're not there yet, and so right now we're looking at more prescriptive moments of observation that still track to that behavior change or to that learning outcome that you're trying to achieve.
Well, and I think this is where we're going to see the things come together. I'm in conversations with a number of different companies who are doing some under the hood, behind the radar type stuff, or off the radar type stuff. And I do think we are going to get to this point where we're going to be able to combine these two things together. So again, when I think of what you're doing, right, this is where we're intentionally saying, we know you have a need, and we're going to actually, give you a development opportunity in a safe environment where you can do this and you can practice, you can build these skills and get feedback and move along. Then you start pairing it. And I think this is where generative AI is going to make some big strides in this. Also then be able to analyze some of the data that's being created and happening just in standard work practices, so that you can start to benchmark and see where is it breaking down. Because there are going to be times, no doubt, and I see this all the time, where people know how to do it and they're capable of doing it, yet they're not.
Yeah.
And then that leads to the question of, so what's going on and how do we fix that? Because if they can and they know how and are able to, but they're not, well, then what's leading to that, so that we can actually start solving problems around that?
It's the holy grail, right, of learning, which is being able to actually take the intentional actions of learning professionals and turn it into the outcomes and attach them of the business. And we were talking about before. It's like I came into learning from this other passion, right? And I was pretty shocked at how detached those investments and those outcomes are, and even with
extremely detached.
Yeah, and even with the best of intentions and in people's full buy-in, it's still hard. So I think you're right. I think there's a huge opportunity with generative AI to start to be able to query those systems and to be able to attach these things without this mammoth tech investment or a 2-year long integration project that gets us to to be able to connect the data sets. So that will be, again, that to me, that's the holy grail, because then businesses, it's like, there is no budget they won't spend on the outcomes that they can predict.
That's just it, because people will spend money if they know that what they're getting in return for that is going to benefit what their end game is. Nobody's going to go, no, I'm not going to do it. That's where some of the hesitancy is it's a lot of a gambling of, am I convinced that this is actually going to work? Once we can start showing for sure, yeah, this will work, and we know because we can prove it, those questions go away.
Yeah, it becomes the most foolproof investment in the business.
Yeah, right. In many regards, it does, because the unpredictability of your employees is, in many regards, sometimes one of the biggest, it can take you down. And I think that's one of the reasons why we continue investing in it, even when we don't know. But it's one of these, once you can start predicting this with a degree of accuracy, it's a game changer for organizations. And I think
100%.
that's where the ones who lean into this sooner than later, we're going to see them step ahead far faster and leapfrog even some of their, former giants who, well, there's no way we're going to beat that. And you're going to see these other companies just go boop, boop, and leap right over them because they get it.
Yep.
So last thing that we have with the time, because there's somewhere I want to go with this, but we're too late in the conversation for me to unpack this can of worms, is a lot of folks, when they think of VR, immediately jumped to the headset. And I just
Mhm.
want to call this one out because I do see this being a real barrier. Even in a post I made yesterday, somebody commented on this, the fact like, well, the tech infrastructure is burdensome and it's unpredictable. And yes, if you're thinking about it in terms of headsets alone, I would 100% agree with you. The maturity in the hardware, the infrastructure required, the people's comfort with even having some of these devices on, there's a lot of barriers. But I feel like that's a misnomer because people assume that that goes hand in hand, and it doesn't have to. So let's talk about
Yeah.
that a little bit, because you from the beginning have said the headset should not be a dependency for a VR experience.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's where you get the best outcomes for biological
Agreed.
reasons, right?
Yes.
But I mean, take it out of this context for a second. You know, like just because there wasn't digital video distribution back in the day didn't mean people weren't already making videos. You know,
Yes.
like think about it as the underlying content and the investment in 3D content.
Yep.
That can be experienced in a browser, that can be experienced in a headset, and eventually you'll be able to experience it in your room. And if you make those investments smart, it will still stay relevant, right? And you won't just have to recreate it, and it won't be a lost investment. And so where we're getting the bigger programs, you know, is people who understand that they're going to still distribute, you know, a large percentage of the learning content in a browser,
Yep.
or at a kiosk, you know, like an interactive learning kiosk or something. But they've got this headset population that they actually have conviction over, and they want to grow, but they have to
Yeah.
figure out some of those logistical challenges. They also go, well, is this something I need to get on my budget for refresh every year, every 2 years? Like, there's still questions that they have. Just that's
For
no
sure.
different than mobile phones or any other device that we give to our employees in that regard, right? So I think it's just that it's again that you pick the right partners, the right platforms, because then you will be able to. There's some that are only VR, and there's some that are only, you know, in browser but still 3D. So it's like if you pick one that is kind of this kind of like create once and experience it many, which there are several good ones right now. You know, that then you're protected for that, and you can step it. You can
You're
start to
one
step
of
into.
them, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did that. We did that. Yeah.
No, but I remember when we first started talking about this, this was one of the things that, and I love the way you broke this down in terms of that thinking with scale and future proofing it is such an
Mhm.
important piece. But we have to break this idea. And I've been in conversations with VR enthusiasts who get very adamant that not in headset is not VR.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I understand what you're saying. And I agree, like you said, is the experience distinctly different? And do I absolutely believe there is an X factor that comes with being fully immersed in the environment? Hands down, I would
Yeah.
never
without a
deny
doubt.
the fact that there is something completely distinctly different and you will get a superior experience out of it. However, to write off the capability because, well, we don't have headsets or that's not something that we can do, I think is a huge mistake,
Yeah.
because the capability and the possibilities of this are massive. And to your point, though, this is an important question. So if you're a learning leader or a business leader considering this, you need to ask these questions as part of your investigation, because I've seen people get burned with this,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
they've gone down a path, they've made some serious investments only to realize their investments were tied sometimes even to a specific hardware device.
Oh
It's like,
yeah.
well,
Very
this
much.
only works on the Quest Go. And then the new one came out and everything just vaporized and they had to start over. And that's left
Yep.
people burned going, yeah, see, this is why I'm not getting into this space, because it's too big of an investment with too much uncertainty ahead. And I think what we're getting at here is those two are not necessarily interconnected in a way that you can't disconnect them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's a maturity of where we are too, because I don't think people made bad decisions back in the day when they made some of those
No.
decisions, but there just wasn't, you know, we weren't at a maturity place where platforms had the capability to publish multiple places. There wasn't the frameworks and SDKs in place to be able to build even a VR experience that would work across devices. So you would get locked, you know, And so as a company building this space, it's just a landmine, or it's a field of landmines, where you're trying to steer
Yeah.
around these different things as it's developing, while making sure your customers are making good investments that they can then depend on for years to come, because they're making sizable investments.
They
Um,
are.
even today, like, a single piece of content's a lot cheaper, but now people are making 100 pieces of content. So it's like, it's still a sizable investment.
Yes.
Um, so I think the maturity is definitely here now, to where these things shouldn't move out from underneath your feet, which
Yeah.
is I think the biggest thing that enterprises are concerned about is
Yep.
they know things change. I just want to know kind of how they're going to change so I can prepare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think that's just where the call out for folks is, like you said, it's not about shaming or that bad decisions were made. It was the
Yeah.
reality of things. I mean, I remember back when we had the same conversation about mobile versus desktop,
Yeah.
and you would do something that was, oh, it doesn't work on this, and oh, we totally had to scrap it. And the unfortunate part is, though, when you have those experiences, sometimes you're less likely to take the
Yeah.
risk again because you're concerned about it. Or you may be operating off 5-year-old Intel that hasn't kept up with what the market dynamics are doing. And so just again, for folks who are listening, if you're avoiding this kind of active learning, if you're avoiding simulation, I would just encourage you, be careful that you're not doing it based on false assumptions, because
Yeah.
you really are, in my opinion, missing out on some incredible opportunity that is going to benefit, your employees, but also you as a learning organization. I mean, like we said earlier, the ability to demonstrate real business value and quantify investments. If you're playing these cards right, the opportunity has never been better than it was before. And I think there's some really positive things for those who play it right.
I'm waiting for the first like major breakout success story where people, where there is a competitive advantage in the business that becomes such a driver for the success of that business, that then everybody goes, oh, well, why didn't we all do that? Because we know it's
Yeah.
coming. I mean, the people are making those investments, and I think we're going to see some breakout brands where they were very intentional about this moment in time, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and of course, it's going to take a cycle to play through, and they need to onboard a lot of people, and they need to see those business impacts. It's predictable at this point. Like, I don't
Yep.
think that's not a far-fetched prediction. It's just like we
No. No, it's not a matter of if. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I think this is where, going back to the conversation of how do we invest our resources in the more human activities, there's some work for us to do to work with our business stakeholders on this stuff.
Yeah.
Because even going back to problem solving, the actual human problem, sometimes that gets masked with all this business process system technology stuff, and being able to go, right, but at the end of the day, what is actually going on with the people, that if we could get them doing B instead of A, we'd flip this whole pyramid on its head and change it. And that's a fun conversation, but it's one we need to be having more of so that we can prove that out.
Yeah. Yeah. I could go.
Awesome.
I could tell some great stories.
I
there,
know.
but
I
I'm out
told
of
you I
time.
was going to start something up.
Like, oh man, I have a
told you,
really good story.
Well, this isn't the last one. We said we were going to do this again, so we'll have to figure out the time zones, because you'll be in Singapore. Maybe we'll catch you when you're back over stateside.
Yeah.
But this has been really fun, and I'm glad we were able to line this up. I know it's been a long time coming, but hopefully this has changed people who are thinking about this or thinking that it disappeared. Hopefully this has changed your thinking about it, because again, active learning at scale. I love that thought and that takeaway, Kyle. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks again. It was a really good time.
All right. Have a good one, everybody, and we will see you next week.